sit here, Ted. You get in the middle. Right? I know. Every flaw is going to come out. Hey, Mark, when we go to the student questions, when we go to the student questions, how do we do that?
They're going to come up to the microphone. So you say if the student questions approach the mic, and I'll take it from there.
Good afternoon, folks. We have a terrific panel in front of us, but we don't have a ton of time. So in order to maximize our time enjoying this incredible event, I simply want to say thank you to Commissioner Silver, to Ted Leonsis, to our alum, John Ourand, and to our other esteemed panelists on the second panel. Thank you also to President Pines for being here today, and to the former director of the Povich Center, George Solomon, Shirley's editor. Nobody gets applause like George. And to Rick Davis, the chair of the Board of Visitors of the Merrill College. I'm Rafael Lorente, and I'm the dean of the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, so I have the coolest job ever because I get to do stuff like this. A special thanks to the Povich family and the other supporters of the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. There are lots of sports programs around the country, but only Merrill Colleges carries forward the legacy of the great Shirley Povich. The support of the Shirley Povich Center helps the center produce difference-making journalism, like projects about the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and it will help the center take students to Africa this summer. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Hyman, the director of the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael. Ted, Adam, welcome to College Park.
Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you here. This panel has a hard stop at 5:45. I believe Ted and Adam are headed to a basketball game. So I'll be brief. Our conversation with Ted and Adam will be led by John Ourand of the Sports Business Journal and a Terp, importantly. Applause for John Ourand. At 5:30, we'll take a few questions from students in the audience. Students only, please, and we will call you to the microphones. A media panel featuring 3 journalists acclaimed for their coverage of the NBA will begin immediately after the first panel. Moderating that panel will be my esteemed colleague, Kevin Blackistone, and the media panel will last approximately 1 hour with time for questions from everyone. So even if you're not a student, stand up at the mic. You will get a turn. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn things over to John Ourand. John?
Thank you, Mark. Adam, in his introduction, Mark mentioned where I went to college. He didn't mention where you went to college. We have a Dookie, we have a Hoya on the stage, but hey, welcome still. No. Look, this is something that's being put on by the Maryland School of Journalism, and we have 2 important people in the sports business on the stage. I'll start with you, Adam. What's the state of sports journalism right now in your mind?
Well, real quickly, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. We've done a lot with this program with George over the years, and Mike Bass, our head of communications, is here, and we've worked with many of the graduates as well, so thanks for that. State of sports journalism, look, if you're on the side that's being covered, you always have your issues, and Ted and I always go back and forth on those, but in all seriousness, I think generally it's never been better. When I look at the volume of coverage, the depth of coverage of our league and our players, I think we're largely the beneficiary of that. It's more often that we're complaining that we're not being covered rather than about specifically the way we're being covered. I think in many times, all the leagues do this. We're counting like, oh my God, look how many credentialed media came to fill in the blank and that kind of notion, and we're constantly badgering media to cover us more. I'd say so on the the digital side, and putting aside sort of social media part of coverage, of putting that aside, but professional journalism, it's amazing to me the number of bloggers, the number of very sophisticated people that cover our league on a regular basis. In fact, it's hard to keep up with it in terms of the amount of demand on us to supply them information. But it turns our players and our and our teams into multi-dimensional, both the players and our operations, in ways that find points of commonality with more and more people, which is ultimately tells stories, it builds narratives, it's what draws people into the game. So I'm very pleased with that.
Ted, same question to you.
I love everyone who covers our teams and our organization. Mostly you, John, is my neighbor and friend, and George Solomon. I will say that the journalists might have a head start and have more talent than the organizations that they're working in. I'm finding that the business has changed so dramatically, and the businesses that are housing a lot of the journalists are just a step behind right now. And that really is causing some tension, I think sometimes even from the quality of the product. And what it ends up doing is making bigger organizations understand that, well, we're a media company. We've got at Monumental 5 million people in our database with their credit cards, with their email addresses. That's more than Comcast, who sold me NBC Sports Washington, has as subscribers, just as an example. It's one of the reasons that I felt we had to purchase our network. And we're really trying to build a way to communicate to our customers. We'd like to work hand in hand with journalists. journalism, the term, I do think needs, I don't think retweeting someone else's work counts as journalism. I think what Adam said in showing your talents, doing the work, providing your own narrative, your own way of looking at things is what's important. Twitter really changed things. Now what are we going to do? I mean, X seems like it's contracted dramatically. So I think it's a pivotal time right now, and most of the journalists in the room are going to have to look at how do I define victory on the go forward. And I don't think it's going to be any more how many followers do you have and how fast can I retweet someone else's story.
As you said, you bought from Comcast, NBC Sports Washington, now Monumental Sports Network, since been rebranded. It's a network that produces and covers your games with the Mystics, with the Wizards, with the Capitals. Do you consider that a journalistic endeavor?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in that we have sideline reporters, we have people that are interviewing the players and trying to tell their stories. If you define journalism as let's try and break the most negative news we can find because it'll get clicks, because in our business, we don't get paid by the distributors for the pregame or the postgame show. They have no value in that ecosystem. All of the value is on the live game programming, because sports is this unbelievable convener in a community where you bring together tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people watching on TV, and then 15, 20,000 people per game in the building, and you're getting 3 hours of their time. So when you look at the collective amount of time, and the value is in the live programming, the IP, not in the tweeting about something afterwards. So yeah, in that case, I think we are an important journalistic media business, just not maybe by some of the older definitions.
We all know about NFL Network, MLB Network, NHL Network. The very first one was one that you worked on, NBA.com, I believe it was called, right?
It was called, how cute were we? It was called NBA.com TV. Everybody was adding .coms to everything, and then it was adding value, so we tried.
So you have nearly a quarter century of owning your own media.
Right.
In terms of the journalistic value of what you do on that network, how has that evolved?
Well, I was thinking of the question as Ted was answering it, thinking maybe you might ask me the same question. So to me, when defining journalism, I don't think to the extent MSNBC has a point of view or Fox News has a point of view, I think there's still journalism, or an op-ed piece for that matter in the Washington Post or the New York Times. I think as long as you're transparent about what your incentives may be or who you are, and then the listener or viewer can make their own decision based on that information, to me it's very much journalism. So I think in the case of I used to run NBA Entertainment earlier on in my career, and we produced some of the, in those days, the largest selling home videos, frankly, in the world, Come Fly With Me, Michael Jordan, things like that. They were produced by NBA Entertainment. And to me, as long as people understood that's NBA Entertainment, and we had a show called Inside Stuff on NBC back in the day with Ahmad Rashad and Willow Bay and other things that, from my standpoint, is, again, we weren't pretending that we weren't the NBA producing those shows. And I think now, even in the production of our games, in many cases, our arenas are controlling, our teams are controlling the production. But the talent, and there's like David Aldridge, others here who work as talent, they have in essence their own brand. So regardless of who is paying their salary, they have to stand for their own values, and people can make their own judgments. And then outside the four corners of the game, as Ted is saying, that's where my first answer, it's amazing how little transactional cost there is to getting into the business. Unlike when you graduated, if you wanted to be seen or heard, you had to get over this through this filter, this barrier, to allow people to hear you. Now, great content seems to be able to find an audience almost regardless of where it comes from. So I think that, just to go back to where Ted was, ultimately our job is to expand our viewership, expand our audience. And you need high quality content, and it's a recognition that there's all kinds of opportunities for others to have their voices heard, and that all goes into the mix.
I'd also say the big media companies are not having a growth mindset right now. They're cutting back. When we bought our network, there was equipment and cameras that were 20, 22 years old. And they were laying off, and they were consolidating, and they were cutting back, and it was not a good culture in any way. And we just greenlit $85 million. We're moving everyone into a beautiful building right next to the arena. We're spending $60 million on an all-digital, the best quality. Looks very much like what was built in Atlanta for TNT. We're trying to future-proof our business and want to get ahead of things. And I have always found that if you're first with a growth mindset, talent will want to come be with you. They'll have the confidence that they'll have jobs, they'll have careers, that the company will be there to make investments to keep growing. And so, we probably have taken a little bit of risk. I can't tell you how many people have said, "You bought an RSN?" And I said, but I didn't buy an RSN. I value the rights to those games. And they're not terrestrial rights, they're digital rights. They're probably the most valuable content rights in the world right now, right? You see how important sports has become to our culture, to media. You look at the just ratings, an old school way of valuing what, Adam, every of the top 100 shows, 95 of them, 98 of them are sports.
The top rated shows on literally every network right now are live sports.
When I did the story about you buying NBC Sportswashing and we had the interview, I was like, "You bought an RSN?" I was one of those people. I am the media reporter for Sports Business Journal, and the biggest story that I've been following in this year was the NBA's rights. The biggest story I'm going to follow next year is going to be the NBA's rights. Adam, in 5 years, how am I going to be able to watch the Washington Wizards?
First of all, we didn't do full introductions at the beginning, so Ted is not only one of my bosses, but he's the chair of the NBA's media committee, so he needs to answer this question as well. But my hunch is in 5 years, people, I mean, this is going to sound a bit trite, and because this is what everyone's been saying for the last few years, but in 5 years, you're going to be able to watch the game anywhere you want to watch it, on any device that's available to you. I mean, that would be my hope, that if you're still subscribing to cable, you're going to be able to watch it on cable or satellite. If you're getting a game, off digital rabbit ears, you're going to watch it that way. Or if you're on your phone or your device, that game is going to magically appear. We were even having this conversation this morning. I mean, I think even for great journalism, you guys are all living through some of the same difficulties we are around discovery. Like, how do you find, whether it's X or just in any publication, how do you find the great stories? Often they find us these days, somebody, word of mouth, somebody's texted to you, emailed it to you, or whatever else. I think for us, my hope is, for example, if you're a Washington Wizards fan and you've indicated that you want to watch those games, that your smartphone, rather than even having to click through an app, it'll, at 7 o'clock that night, if that Wizards-Knicks game is on or whatever, it will just start showing on your phone. You have a choice to tune it out or do something else. But I think, I obviously couldn't agree more with Ted that this is the very best content, but then the question is, how do we make it more accessible, and how do we make it more easily discoverable to our fans? And that's a technological challenge. I mean, Ted's background is as a technologist at AOL, and the wonderful thing that's happening for us right now is The market is working. Investment dollars are following, but better equipment is being purchased. People are putting, great minds are at work as to how to find better ways to bring that top-notch content, in this case, premium live sports, to viewers, and then find more ways, once that content reaches viewers, to create more engagement.
You can tell why Adam is the best commissioner and why he's beloved by the owners.
You own teams in other leagues, so don't get yourself in trouble.
David Stern.
Many good, great commissioners.
David Stern, God rest his soul, I don't think could ever say, he's my boss, and a smart guy probably would have said, you idiot. Don't say a word. I got this.
You realize this is not off the record. These are journalists.
He would have used a couple words in front of idiot, too, I suspect.
We all knew David well, yes. So did George.
We talked today about much bigger agenda items than you would think a basketball team, a basketball commissioner would talk about. The Povich Center, and Phil was all about service journalism. He was a great publisher, a great journalist. But we talked today about the demography of the planet. The first question I asked your president was, tell me what's going on your campus. What is happening here? You're a university that has 6,000 Jewish students, 3,000 Muslim students. In the world today, there's 8 billion people. 42% of the population of our planet is 25 years or younger. They weren't born when 9/11 happened. I mean, it's startling what moves in front of you. And so we produce games, we make technology, we have rules, we have to hear, well, that's not journalism, how are you doing this within these business rules that haven't changed in 25, 30 years. And companies, industries, individuals get in trouble when you get comfortable being comfortable. And so we have this opportunity in sports, but mostly the NBA, because of the players, the game itself. There's only 1 billion people on the planet right now that say they like basketball. They play it, they watch it. We have unbelievable growth potential. We need to get more of the 8 billion people liking basketball. And we see that we have the opportunity to work with multiple tiers of the value chain in technology and media. So if you look at Apple, if you look at Google, if you look at Microsoft, they're not North American companies. They're global companies. They're not terrestrial companies. They're digital companies. They were born digitally. Of the 8 billion people on the planet, there's 350 million here. We're a tiny part of the ecosystem.
Less than 5%.
Yep. So we want to look to the future, and we need to change our vocabulary. We can't be talking about, well, how much are you making for licensing the rights? We should be talking about, look at all the data that we have, that we generate, that's in our files, that can inform next generation AI platforms. That's where the world is going. You can't have good AI without having good search, and you can't have good search without good algorithms, and the algorithms are being fed by the data. We're digital-first data companies, and our manifest destiny, if you will, is to work globally, and then we can work nationally with our traditional partners who are still mostly terrestrial-based, right? It's NBC and Comcast. You know NBC more than you do Comcast, right? They're a consumer brand that you watch on Channel 504 at my house on DirecTV. And then there's local. And that's what we're focused on as team owners. And that business blew up. It went away. And so, we have great opportunities to expand and redefine what we stand for on a business side. I admire Adam very much in doing some log rolling, because he's not only focused on the business side of things, and our next media, digital is very important to the league, but the game itself. We have to have great product. And, that Adam was able to very quickly launch this new in-season tournament, which has been awesome. And Adam, you should talk about us being innovators and trying to bring to market new products. I've read all your interviews lately on the All-Star game. Obviously, you have very strong opinions that you have to make the product great, and then you have to look at how you improve the business.
What you're talking about, is that coming up in the next rights deal, or is that is that like 5 years down the road?
It's interesting, John. I mean, I'd say, even with our existing partners, and Ted was referring to a meeting we had just this morning with our media committee. I mean, we're always talking about the here and now. I mean, even though we're likely to enter into another long-term deal, I mean, it's fun. I listened to your podcast. There's my plug for you today with Andrew Marchand, and you guys are trying to make predictions, frankly, about direct-to-consumer a year from now. So think about the position we're in when we're looking to potentially do deals for a decade, and what's that going to mean? What's that going to mean for the viability of those companies? What's it going to mean for the products, for the way that our games are going to be distributed? I remember, Ted, years ago, you were giving a presentation. I think, I won't say which brand phone you held up, but you held up a phone and you said, how many people in this room think they'll be using this phone 10 years from now? And, people were like, oh, I'm not sure. And they said, but how many people think the Washington Wizards or the Commanders are going to be the team in town 10 years from now? And everybody raises their hand. So I think the great news, there's certain permanence to our brands, to our content, to what we provide. But how we deliver that is so uncertain. I think to what Ted was suggesting a minute ago, I think I'm learning too on the job that, we're sort of, my theme for this season is back to basketball. That, and I mean it, that I used to, I grew up not only working for David Stern, but then running a division called NBA Entertainment, and with all the things off the court. But then you realize, and this is obviously stating the obvious, but all the great things that we're able to accomplish all stem from the game on the floor. And one of the examples Ted just referenced, we had a really bad experience at the All-Star game last year. It just wasn't much of a game. And what was interesting, because of all the things around it, we were in Salt Lake City. We have this technology summit we do, which was fantastic. We had a day of service. We had a bunch of different seminars on important issues that people were following, some great receptions, concerts, and everything else. And I remember before the game started on Sunday night, everybody saying, congratulations, this is the best All-Star weekend ever. And then even people, and then there's this game, it's sort of the backdrop, people are eating, drinking, whatever. And then 95% of the coverage coming out of Salt Lake City is what a terrible All-Star game it was. But it was, it sort of shook me up a little bit to remember that we're a media business. 99% of the imagery is coming from people watching through some sort of device, not who are there in person. And the great news is with terrific team owners and team personnel, and then with our union and our players, we were able to sit down and say, we got to create a better All-Star experience. So, we're doing some things in Indiana this year, sort of under a back-to-basketball theme, going back. We tried some cute things maybe about the special endings and different point scores per quarter. We're going back to more of a conventional game, you could say, in the heartland of basketball in Indiana. An old-style 48-minute game, East play West. But then beyond that, what Ted is referencing, we're looking at potentially learning from others, maybe a Ryder Cup type model where, U.S. players are playing international players. But just most importantly, it's a recognition that at the end of the day, regardless of all the great content, and I'd like to think it's the same for journalism, however it's delivered, and whether it's delivered in smaller bits, or it's video, or it's in hard copy, it's what sells and what draws attention is great content, great original content, not just, as Ted was saying, the retweeting of things. So we are spending a lot of time thinking about how we can continue to improve the game, and that's all the way dealing with the pipeline of players to making sure they're not just the best athletes in the world, but they're the most skilled athletes in the world, teaching guys to play as teams. We're doing it with girls too, with the WNBA. So that's all the kinds of things that we've been talking about.
And as Adam said, getting back to basketball, I'm looking at, I see Rick Allen, who's CEO, co-founder of ViewLift, which built our direct-to-consumer product. And we bought our network, and one of the reasons we bought our network was to free us up so we could go direct-to-consumer. And a lot of teams are going direct-to-consumer. So we launched with the first Caps game. And we've been doing this longer than anybody. Small detail, the first game, as a customer, you couldn't watch. It was on ESPN. My wife couldn't come to the game. She said, what channel is the game on? I go, ESPN. Well, it wasn't on ESPN. It was on ESPN Plus and Hulu, which on my system is on Apple TV. And so it's like we just spent all this money buying our network and our rights back. We've spent even more money launching this unbelievable platform. We've spent a lot of money bringing in subscribers, and I can't tell a customer how to watch it. And we're going to have to, as a business, keep slicing, if you will, the rights to a whole different set of partners. But we can't do that at the expense of making it hard or inconvenient from our customers to go, oh, it's 7 o'clock tonight, and there's a game on, and I might be on TV, I might be on my iPad, I might be on my phone. It shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter to the fans. In fact, they get mad at us. It's like, oh, the game wasn't on last night. Oh, you're ripping me off because you've sold me a subscription saying you can watch all of our games. So I'm trying to bring our organization and friends who are other owners to say, don't take your eye off of that ball. Don't assume that just because you're developing now and doing lots of innovative things that the fans are going to appreciate it. If they can't find it, if it's too hard to navigate, we're going to do a disservice to what we're trying to do, which is we want ubiquity. And if we can get ubiquity, then we'll get growth. And if we get more growth, then the players and the unions happy because, you know, they're our partners in this. And it allows us to have a growth mindset. If you look today in the business environment, there is no stasis. You're either winning, growing, or you're losing. There's nobody who's just kind of flat. And that constant reinvention, what Adam's going to do with the game itself and with the distribution, we have to do locally to make sure that our fans, of which we have a lot of people that care about the team and the game, we have to be in higher service to them.
We are at a journalism school right now. We have some students that want to ask some questions. Is that ready, Caitlin? Come on up to the mic here and please announce your name and...
I'm James Consoli. I'm a student at the Merrill School of Journalism, and my question is related to the in-season tournament. In creating the in-season tournament, was there any discussion regarding shortening the length of the regular season? And if so, why was this not a viable option?
So good, it's a great question. We've been discussing what was originally, we were calling it the mid-season tournament, and we pivoted to the in-season tournament along the way, largely because we decided in the fourth quarter of the calendar it was a better time in terms of competition for us to air the game. So I'll start with that. And then actually, as opposed to shortening the regular season, our initial plan had new games on top of the 82-game season. And actually, through a dialogue with the teams and the Players Association, we concluded that that was not a good idea right now. And we could have a longer conversation about load management and the health of the players, but at least for now, we decided we shouldn't be lengthening our season. And then credit to, great folks, colleagues in the league office and working with the teams and the Players Association, we came up with this idea, which is what we currently have for people who aren't familiar with it, in essence for games to count twice. So that, like Ted has an in-season tournament game tonight against the New York Knicks. It counts both as a regular season game and it counts in the in-season tournament. And the way we ultimately configured the tournament is every team plays 82 games in our season, but only 2 teams in the final game will, in essence, play an 83rd game. And I'd also add that because this goes John's point, a little bit about what we're thinking of in terms of our television deals. We didn't want to wait. John, we could have waited and said, let's wait till the new set of television deals, then we can go charge more for this. And I also felt just in this current media landscape, we also didn't want to go to our television partners and say, pay us more in the middle of your deals, and especially, as Ted said, we understand the environment we're operating in now. So instead it was sort of, let's try to prove out this concept. So we went to our existing partners, Disney, ABC, ESPN, and Warner Brothers Discovery, TNT, and said, let's figure out a way to do this together. We created this notion that the tournament nights are Tuesday and Friday, and then just with this Final Four. And we think it'll work pretty well. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you learn every day and best plans, but then once it starts, you start to learn new things. But that's what we're looking at right now. And just lastly, I'll say, as Ted is saying, when you look at the big world out there, the 8 billion people, and the opportunity a sport like basketball has, and the NBA at the top of that basketball pyramid, who knows what our schedule will look like in 5 or 10 years from now. It may be that there are periods of the season where teams travel in pockets. Some teams go to Latin America, some teams go to Asia, some teams go to Europe. I mean, recognize that we can only put so many miles on the player's body, but there may be a better way to distribute these games and to reach fans globally than just playing 82 games in U.S. and Canada.
Adam's incredibly humble. I said he could win the Nobel Peace Prize one day. Well, because does anyone agree on anything anywhere in the world? Is there any poll that you can take? Is there any discussion that you can have that there's not, 50-50 and 10% on the edge of each side of that issue? And Adam gave a little talk the other day, and afterwards I said, yeah, that's really why this is so valuable. Countries can be at war with one another. They can hate one another. And then they go play basketball or soccer. They go to the Olympics. I'm Greek. They used to stop war so that you could go play in the Olympics. And what is it about sport that everyone goes, I'm not going to try to renegotiate how long the quarter is or the half or how many minutes I have at halftime to recover and how many fouls a player gets before he fouls out, or that this line, we are talking about borders, okay? Kyle Kuzma stepped on the out-of-bounds line the other day, okay? And they showed the replay, and it was, okay, we agree. And when you look at sports in that higher calling light, it's probably the only hope we have. I'd much rather go to the better angels of people on competitiveness and community and just the love of the game than rely on politicians to kind of work it out. And so when you look at sports in that way, we have a much bigger social responsibility than, are we going to win tonight? What's the gate tonight? Can we make the playoffs? Sheesh, you've lost 3 20-point leads in the fourth quarter.
I was not going to bring that
up. Several people have come up to remind me of that tonight.
I was not going to bring that up, Ted. I was not.
But you see what I mean, and it's why people are so innately attracted to these games. And so, you know, Adam's the commissioner of the growth sport. It's also, if you do the right things for the fans, you do the right things for the partners, the financial success will follow. I've been, you know, in several public companies. They created a lot of value. They go public. The NBA, Adam's CEO, if you will, of a undervalued $100+ billion company. Right? If you take all of our teams and what they're valued at, and we haven't valued yet the real asset, which is the logo and the corporate office and the commission and all the talent, you know, that does the media deals. So I think, you know, we continue to have that virtuous cycle, but it only works if the product's great, if we continue to innovate, and we never lose the, you called it the rule of law the other day, and I went, yeah, that's kind of what it is. No one argues with us, right, about the basic fundamentals. You know, if only life could be like that.
Great question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next one, please.
Good evening. My name is Sam Benning, UMD sophomore, executive of the Maryland Sports Business Conference as well. I got a kind of a DEI question for you guys. There's a lack of ownership of NBA teams. There's a lack of owners who are people of color or minorities. So how do you both work to make NBA staff, administrators, and especially the players, given that, you know, most of the NBA players are people of color, how do you make sure that they all feel represented and heard?
I can only answer for me. Sheila Johnson, Earl Stafford, we have more female ownership, more black ownership. I've got Latinos, Raul Fernandez, who's a graduate of University of Maryland. I've got Jung Kim, who's in your Hall of Fame, who's a Korean immigrant. So I take your point, but you know, we're very cognizant that we need to build management teams, leadership teams that are reflective of the community that we serve.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Aaron Dias. I am a journalism major. I'm majoring in journalism, and I am graduating class of 2024. I have a question. What can my generation bring to the table to improve the coverage of the league?
You know, Aaron, Ted made a reference earlier is about putting in the work. Honestly, it served, I know, the two of us so well, and that is to literally do the work. I just find that I think for the best journalists, and John's one of them because he's relentless, and if he doesn't understand something, he asks it again, and he comes at you from a different direction, and he's willing to listen to point of view. He looks at data. You know, we say, well, I understand that that's what people are saying, but here's actual information. You know, again, I just think it just comes down to hard work. I don't have a better way to say it than that.
I think context is much more important than news. If you talk to the executives at Comcast, NBC, the least valuable part of that big conglomerate, the biggest media company, is their news operation. Tariq El-Bashir, who mentored under George, who now works for my network. He's a journalist. He worked at The Athletic. He worked at The Washington Post. When he was at The Washington Post, he said to me once, the NHL and the Capitals are going out of business, and The Washington Post is the bastion. All the wealthy, smart people want to be owning newspapers in their hometown. And, you know, a couple years later, the Post sold for $250 million to Jeff Bezos. And I think providing context, and I'm starting to see some signs of life just lately in the Washington Post, where you don't have to be first, You don't have to retweet something. You don't have to be the same voice because you're with your buddies and your friends and your vocabulary is sounding the same. You need to be able to explain things, and that comes from doing the work, knowing history, looking at things that happen in other industries and connecting those dots, and how would it affect things that are happening today. And the other thing is to bring your point of view to what businesses do to do good. Like, you won't find most tech companies talking about rule of law. That's not how their DNA is created. They're created for profit. You'll never hear us talking about profit. We talk about being in service to our communities, to our players, finding the higher calling, and we're proving that that's a really good business model because our business is great. So I would, regardless of which industry, you're the most service-oriented of all generations. And so, that's what this media center at the university is all about, with race and culture and justice. Bring that perspective, but you've got to do the work. You can't say, they're bad people. We need a little bit more context and a little bit more thought and work. And I think as the next generation, you'd be advantaged over the folks that, if I can get the story out there first, I win. I don't think that will be the metric of success anymore.
We have 90 seconds left to our hard out, but we do have one more question, so I want to make sure we get to this.
Hello, gentlemen. I wanted to first thank Mr. Leonsis and Commissioner Silver for coming to the symposium tonight. It's been an honor to hear what you guys have to say. My name's Daniel Stein. I'm a freshman here at Merrill. And my question is, the NBA has recently put a lot of resources into developing basketball in Africa. We've seen an influx of players from African countries in the last decade or so. I wanted to ask, what does the successful development of the NBA Africa program look like? So if you had to envision, your goals for the program coming to fruition, what would a successful program look like in, say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thanks for asking the question. I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll give a short answer, and if Ted wants to add anything, I'll just begin by saying this, my point before about data. I was telling someone right before this symposium started, it's quite remarkable that at this point, 10% of players in the NBA were either born or one of their parents was born in Africa. And for us, first of all, just development, the pipeline of players. At the end of the day, this goes back to the game, that having the very best players in the world out on the court. Most recently, Victor Wembanyama, he's French, but his dad's from the Congo. Another player who, connected to Africa in the league. Like, that's what ultimately sells this great game, having these incredible athletes. So that's the basketball side, and we're also working to develop. It's not just waiting for players to emerge. We have an academy in Africa. We have all kinds of programs, Basketball Without Borders, et cetera, to help develop them. And then there's the business itself that we're, for example, in Rwanda, in Kigali, we were partners on building an arena there, and we're working on an arena infrastructure not so different than what Poland has done and what Ted is in the process of doing, and making sure there's a state of arena for fans to enjoy the games, because these arenas are also economic engines. They're full, these great arenas, I don't know, 300 nights a year, you probably have activity in your building. It's not just about basketball. There's all the economic activity that then comes, residential, commercial, et cetera, from those areas. And then it's an engine for growth. And then frankly, I think in the same way that these arenas, these teams put cities, countries on the map, that it's very much a global phenomenon, like that, Giannis Antetokounmpo, if he's in Milwaukee, people all around the world are talking about Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Bucks. So it's multifaceted, but it's a growth strategy over time.
Thank you.
What a treat this has been. Thank you very much for coming on a Friday night in rush hour. So thank you very much.
thinking about, since you're talking about delivering stuff, I thought maybe we talk about like what is our role in helping you deliver. Like, so they were talking about delivering product, watching that kind of stuff. But what do you deliver? So delivering a game now where you see blowouts, viewership is down a little bit. So like for you to be complicit in delivering that, or yeah, right. Right, exactly. And how do you rank games? Like you're, like, yeah, because your game's coming up ahead. You're watching the rollout of this new entity, and it ain't great. Almost up. You made it. No, I thought you made it. I thought you come ready for last minute. Were you in Brooklyn on Sunday? Did you guys have a seat? Hey, Drew.
Okay, panel 2 is about to begin. Please take your seats. So our panelists are almost seated. Welcome Ava Wallace from the Washington Post. Frank Isola from ESPN, Maryland grad. And dramatically sprinting into the room, David Aldridge from The Athletic. And our moderator for panel 2, my friend and colleague, Kevin Blackistone.
Thank you very much. This on? Everybody got it? Cool. All right, so we got a DC guy, me, we got a DC guy, DA, DC woman, Ava, and in traditional Maryland, Maryland tradition, a New Jersey guy in Frank Isola. New York. All right, so are Leonsis and
they took
gone?
They
gone?
yeah.
All right, so now let's talk about some real stuff.
Got to get on this helicopter to get to Cap One by game time.
So we heard about all this business stuff, which is what John was supposed to get into, and how they're going to deliver this new product and what's out. But when you look at some of the data, viewership for NBA games over the last few years, down a little bit. We got this whole load management thing in now, so you don't necessarily get to see a star player in your city. We've got this new product called the in-season tournament. What is our role, or maybe should I say, what is our complicity in bringing forward this new NBA? How are we supposed to cover this new NBA?
The same way we covered the old NBA. You write what you agree with, you write what you disagree with, you tell people why. I wrote a column last week about the in-season tournament. I don't have a problem with it per se. What I have a problem with is the league shoving it down my throat and saying you must enjoy this, or you're not a good basketball fan. And that seems to be that's the marketing tool that they seem to be using. This incessant, kind of lobbying for it. It's like, let it sink or swim on its own merits. If people like it, they'll keep watching it. If they don't, they won't. But don't try to put your thumb on the scale. On the other hand, it's a media company. That's what they do. So. Nothing changes for me, Stone. I just, you cover the league, you talk to people you respect, you listen to as many people as you can, and you make up your mind about how you're going to write it.
And Ava, you're covering what happens in NBA cities and any sports city from time to time, a rebuild. And that is the reason that the team right now is not as good as it has been. Okay. It's not as good right now this particular season. So how do you go about covering that fairly, night in and night out?
Yeah, what was it Ted said about the Washington Post? He's just starting to see signs of life. I'm waiting on that one from his team. It's actually changed quite a bit. I mean, what DA said, it's not necessarily, that part hasn't changed, where you put in the work, as Ted and Adam Silver said. You show up every day, you talk to people, you listen to both sides. But how I deliver and how I kind of smartly cover an NBA team has changed quite a bit for someone who writes for a newspaper. We've got to serve print subscribers who are waiting to see a gamer in the paper every day, and then we've got to serve 99% of our other readers who are not, who if they wanted to know what happened in the game, they're watching the game, they're online. So for me, especially covering a rebuilding team where it's not necessarily the result, the end game that matters, I have to think of a smart way to say, okay, here's what does matter about this team, and here's what you should be paying attention to. And that little thing that was said in practice the other day, that's going to matter 2 months from now. So for me, as someone who has to fill a daily newspaper, it's quite a problem. It's something that we have to figure out, especially because we have to be nimble. And when news breaks, we do have to be there. We have an 11:30 p.m. deadline. I've got time to get stuff in the paper, but it's very much weighing my priorities and thinking about what people actually need to know versus serving my readers and what they should be seeing in a newspaper every day. It's a weird business to be in right now. It's shifting.
And Frank, on a daily basis, what's the real tenor of the conversation, sports radio, you, Brian, talking about the NBA?
Yeah, I do a radio show on Sirius every morning with Brian Scalabrine. It's the NBA, and it's funny because Adam last week was on the J.J. Redick podcast, and he's talked about he wishes it was more like the NFL, where you'd write about and talk about defenses and strategy and what kind of defenses everyone's playing. So what happens? Draymond Green is choking Rudy Gobert. So what are we supposed to talk about? And it's still, I think what kind of keeps the NBA going is that it is a drama league, and I think there's a lot of fans out there that actually enjoy July 1st more than they enjoy the regular season, because July 1st is when free agency starts, and everyone kind of likes the transactional part of it and players moving around. And to be fair, Adam wants to model it a lot of things like the in-season tournament after soccer, and soccer has the same thing with transfers, the transfer window when players move team to team, and I think that's a part of it. The drama of the league certainly keeps it going, and David talked about force-feeding the in-season tournament. That's their baby, 100%. And I get it, because the regular season starts, everyone focuses on the first few games of the season, the season opener for everyone, and then all they talk about is who's going to play on Christmas Day, and then it's the All-Star game, then it's who's going to be MVP, and then the playoffs start. So I think it's a smart thing for them to do, but I think with what David said about Adam Silver and the league wanting everyone to be talking about the in-season tournament, I think what Draymond Green did on the biggest night thus far of the in-season tournament factored into his suspension a little bit, because that's the last thing they wanted people talking about was just this fight, and that's what everyone in the country was talking about.
And that's interesting, because one of the biggest stories coming out of last year was the suspension of Ja Morant, right, which has nothing to do with a game night in and night out, but once again about drama and the idea about how can we police this league. And just thinking about the last 20 years of the NBA, a lot of it has been about policing player behavior, right? Starting with the fight back in Detroit with the Pacers and the Pistons. Mm-hmm. And so, how much of that is factored into, how we cover the league today and how they handle it?
I think that was obviously a big topic. If you kind of wrap that up with the dress code and all those things that were going on in the first decade of this. But I really do think, Stone, I think it's always going to be an issue that you have to kind of monitor and keep front of mind. But the whole notion of player empowerment, to me, has kind of taken over the whole thing. And how much power are we going to allow players to have? Like, you can sense the pushback from some owners, especially, about players being able to not only demand trades, but demand where they're going to be traded to and who they're going to play with. And there's some owners not down with that at all. So I'm going to be fast.
Didn't stop the Clippers, though.
It did not. No, that's what I'm saying. So the players' power, to me, is a big story going forward. The ability to kind of shape their own destiny, even in a league with if not a hard cap, as close to a hard cap now as you could possibly have, making it almost impossible for teams to spend the way they used to spend. And even with that, you saw teams going all in. You saw Milwaukee go get Dame. You saw Boston go get Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. You saw Philly trade James Harden. Is addition by subtraction? Yes, but it's still a big name. So teams are still making these moves because owners want to win. I don't care what rules you put in. I don't care what things you put in. These guys are competitors, I'll put it that way. And they're used to winning in their businesses, and they want to win with their teams too.
Well, Ava, you ran into that with John Wall here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to kind of be covering athletes, and I think a lot of journalists are kind of in this era where we're covering athletes as whole people, as we should be, of course, but where I think as it used to be a little bit with ball players, where I don't want to have to be a role model. Just let me play the game and let me be who I am. It's a lot more now, no, I actually want to use this platform, and please respect what I have to say, and I have a responsibility to use this platform, especially you're seeing that with a lot of younger athletes. The flip side of that is, of course, is, okay, so now if we hold athletes to that standard, what happens when it's not that just they're not meeting that standard, they're falling way below? Do we cover everybody the same, or we give everyone the same respect and say, John Morant, you're everybody's favorite basketball player who's under 15 years old. You have then a responsibility to do that. It's kind of, I see it as that discussion, and less so than, you know, we're beyond the dress code and beyond the kind of moralizing the NBA, and way more into how do you play both sides and respect everybody's wishes, while also, you know, there is a clear line of right and wrong still, and it is also still our job to point that out.
And that's what happened with John Morant. I mean, he's obviously a terrific player, and I think the coverage of him was mostly positive because he plays with a lot of joy. He's got like the great look. His team was doing well, and then you could almost see the player thinking like, why all of a sudden is everything turned? Well, no, you're the one that turned the coverage. You got in trouble once and a second time, and then a third time, and I think the league actually probably waited a little too long to do something about it, kind of like what they've done with Draymond Green. But because I think Adam kind of walks that fine line. I think he wants to be very respectful toward the players, but there's also, you know, a part where they have to be held accountable. I always say that about player empowerment. It's great, but, you know, sometimes player empowerment is never having to say it's my fault. It's everybody else's fault. And the movement, and I think this summer with Damian Lillard, that was a big thing. I think a lot of fans were turned off by whether it was his agent, Aaron Goodwin, saying he wants to go, he's only going to go to Miami. Then the stories were coming out, if he doesn't go to Miami, he's not going to play. And Damian Lillard is a nice guy. I never believed that for a minute that he wouldn't have played, and clearly that's the case. He's playing for Milwaukee. But I think this season, it seemed to be a bit of a tipping point. And I even think with the James Harden stuff, notice how he got traded before the in-season tournament happened. I think the commissioner was saying, enough of this. And let's try to get something done, and let's move on so everyone's not talking about James Harden. And, of course, now they're talking about Draymond Green. So
What's your sense as doing talk radio from the public in terms of how they enjoy or are bothered by and turned off by player empowerment or players seeming to demand their way?
Yeah, it's funny. I think the majority of people that we get feedback from and callers, it's mostly men. We do have women who call in, but I would say it's mostly men. It's probably 75% African American, maybe 25% white, and it's definitely a generational thing. Older guys think the players, it's just like what people were arguing about 20, 30 years ago. The players make too much money. You know, they shouldn't be making all this. But I think the biggest issue that most people have is the players not playing. So when Adam says, like, let's make it more like the NFL, all right, let's have the players play like they play in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes doesn't miss games if he's healthy.
Right.
And I think that's an issue, and I think that's another part of the in-season tournament. It's to get guys to play, have them be focused on something, win a trophy. And Anthony Davis has said, a bunch of players have said, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If you win, each player gets $500,000. That's what the players are motivated by. That's what everyone is motivated by to a certain degree, and I think that's part of it. Has that turned off some fans? Maybe, but I like the idea. I like the whole European soccer thing. I get into that. I get it's a little bit different, but I don't think there's anything wrong with playing for a trophy. So, and I agree with Adam on this one. I think it was a smart idea.
But you want to see the players. I mean, we got Lynn Elmore here. Lynn never took a night off. You're accustomed to seeing guys play, right?
I'm old now. I used to be young,
Yes,
but
you are.
I'm old now. When I was young, it was a badge of honor for guys to play all 82. Like it was expected of you to play all 82. Hurt, not hurt. I mean, they were all hurt. The injuries have not changed. People act like the injuries are it's this sudden new thing that's happened in the NBA. No, guys were hurt 30 years ago. They had broken fingers and sprained wrists and stretched out ligaments, and they played. I don't think it's because they're tougher or more. It was just the expectation of, as part of being a professional, was you showed up and you suited up if you could play. You suited up for your teammates and for your coach or whatever your motivation was, for the money, whatever the motivation was. But you suited up, and it's just different now. And I can't help but think these guys that are now making $30, $40, $50 million a year, I don't begrudge them a penny of it. I hope they make as much money as they humanly can make. But when you make that kind of money, you're a CEO now. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not just a guy playing basketball. You are the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. You know what I mean? And so you may start thinking about things differently than they did 30 years ago when they were literally playing for their next contract. They didn't know if they'd be in the league after their next, unless they were Jordan or somebody.
You know, there's somebody on a player that we all know. Ava covered him at Georgetown. Is Patrick Ewing. Yeah. So I covered him on the Knicks, and in 1999, when you were probably in the first grade,
Covered him when he's the coach at Georgetown. I just want to clarify.
When he coached there. So, you know, Patrick Ewing, after every game, would have the ice on both knees. He'd have his feet in the ice bucket. He'd be wearing that awful blue terry cloth robe. You know, he didn't practice a lot because he was saving himself to play. So in 99, when the schedule came out, that was a lockout year. They were going to play 50 games starting in February. I forget when it ended, maybe late April. And the schedule came out, and every team was going to play, I think, 2 sets of back-to-back-to-back, 3 games. And we asked Jeff Van Gundy, we said, hey, with the schedule, would you ever consider, how's that going to work with Patrick? He said, no, he's going to have to sit out a game. You could hear it was like a record screecher. Wait, what was that? Patrick Ewing might not play. He's like, yeah, we might have to hold him out of games. I think the first time he played all 3. Yeah. The second time he might have made one. Here's all you need to know. I get it, the pace of play. Everyone wants to get into all that. Michael Jordan's last 3 years in the NBA, he played every regular season game, he played every playoff game, and he played big minutes. And it's just a different mindset. I don't think you're ever going to get back to that because guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo are built like that. But I think sometimes they're being told not to play, so I don't know what the answer is. I think it's unfortunate for people, especially if Milwaukee's coming to your city, and why wouldn't you love to go see Giannis play? Yeah. And he doesn't play. That's a bummer. If you're a fan, you paid the money. It's a big turnoff.
Right.
If it's just one time.
Ava, you've got a young team right now. What's your sense of how they think about this issue?
I know exactly how they think about this issue. Monumental basketball president Michael Winger sitting back there for anyone who's, go question him, go pepper him with questions. But he was asked this at his preseason press conference, and as you mentioned, it's a young team. They're trying to develop good habits, and I think the answer was, we're not really worried about load management. And that's kind of a lot of the issues in the NBA. It pertains to the upper tier of players. It is still a badge of honor to play 82 games. Denny Avdia did it in one of his years. I think Corey Kispert maybe came close, and it's something that they were tracking, that they were saying, I really don't want to sit out this game. This is really important to me to make this thing. But again, you're talking about the same band of players that you're worried about with load management, that you're worried about missing in games. They're the ones who are demanding trades to different teams, and that's kind of what happens when you base your league around stars. It's not the teams, it's not like college basketball where you're basing it around coaches who are in place. It's around one really, really high class of stars, and they're kind of the people that make things move, so.
Yeah, interesting. So we've got this new monumental sports thing that Ted has rolled out, and I think it's safe to say it's interesting so far. But Strauss at the Washington Post wrote a big piece about it the other day, and I'm sure that you all saw. And there was one bit in his story that kind of concerned me. And this is something that's been going on for a while now in sports journalism, and that's when you have large corporate entities that own the team and also own these huge media outlets from which people get their product. And the suggestion in the story was that Monumental Sports executives would prefer to have fan-friendly coverage on their website.
Shocking.
Shocking.
I'm stunned that gambling is going on in this establishment.
Well, we got to get to gambling.
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah.
So, have either of you noticed it? Frank, did you ever notice it with the Yes Network? up in New York with the Yankees. What's the concern about that, particularly given the change in the media landscape and the fact that we know people who we've worked with who have now gone to work for these entities?
Well, I would just say, with all due respect, like Ricky Bobby said, with all due respect, I don't expect a company that owns the team whose games they're broadcasting to be journalistically impartial. I don't know why would anyone expect that? Like, you have to that's kind of baked in. I'm going to watch the game that the team who owns the team is putting on. So, that's just kind of the way it is. You have to kind of be somewhat discerning as a consumer, as a media consumer, and understand it. If I want to watch the Wizards, it's going to be on the Wizards network with the Wizards broadcasters who are paid by the Wizards. It's okay. I mean, I still want to watch the game. You have to take that into consideration, I think. And I think most people out here are smart enough to take that in consideration. If you're looking for, a more, balanced or whatever word you want to use, you would look to the games that are maybe on network TV, that are on TNT, that are on ESPN, where the coverage is national in scope. The reporters are national. The broadcast team is national. The analyst is national. The play-by-play guy is national. They're not being paid by the teams they're covering that night. So, I mean, that's what I would do. And I'm not begrudging Monumental or any sports entity for doing it, because, as Ted said, it's a media company. They have the hope that they can not only have the Caps and the Wizards and the Mystics. He's trying to buy the Nats. And if he buys the Nationals, he'll have 300 nights of programming a year on his network. I get it. I'm not mad at him for it. I'm just saying, understand what it is when you watch it. That's all.
Well, you say that, but I always talk in my class about the symbiotic relationship between sports and sports journalism that doesn't necessarily exist in other areas of journalism. We kind of grew up together. We need sports to be successful in order to have something to write about or something to broadcast. Sure. And sports needs to have us to get their product out there, or at least they used to, right? So for you, Ava, how does this at all figure into your reporting on a day-to-day basis, or even for a game? It was interesting. I'll just say this: watching the 23-point loss, blown lead the other night with the Wizards to Toronto. Well, I was just going to point this out because after the game, I'm just sitting there on the couch and I'm staring at the TV, and one of the first things I hear is that Kyle Kuzma had a great night, had a career night, 34 points, and I'm thinking, but they just got outscored 21-1 and blew these layups, and that's what I really wanted to hear them bore down on. But I read you the next morning.
You read Josh Robbins in The Athletic the next morning,
yes.
right?
Him too.
No, I don't think it necessarily changes anything I do, other than it maybe makes me more aware that it's important to get things on the record and tell things the way they were, and which means, what I'm seeing through my own eyes. I think the only problem with team-owned media networks is if that's the only place, like with any news source, if it's the only place you're getting your news, if it's the only place you're watching the content, that's a media literacy thing to me, not necessarily a journalism issue. And then I think it was brought up when Adam and Ted were speaking, but the issue of transparency. I have, like DA, no issue. I don't expect people on a team-owned network to bash the team or be impartial about the team even, but don't call it journalism. Just be transparent, and that's fine. And I don't know that anyone would have a problem with that.
Interesting, because when this all started, it was, I can't remember what year it was, but the LA Kings writer for Orange County, I think it was, got pulled from the road games. And it was
that for USC you're talking about?
No, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was the Kings. And the Kings' reaction was, hey, where'd the guy go who was covering our team? They said, well, because of whatever reasons, we're taking him away. And they hired him to produce, to do
that happens.
Right, website stuff for the.
That happens a lot. It happens increasingly, and that's okay. Again, I don't have a problem with any of this. This is commerce. This is big business. I get it. Just understand what you're watching. That's all. Just understand what you're watching. When I I actually, when I first started working at Turner, I worked for NBA.com, and I can't tell you how many times people said, well, you're working for the league now.
Right.
And I kept saying, no, I don't work for the league. I am paid by Turner Sports. Turner Sports owns NBA or is a partner in NBA.com. And so you have to kind of try to explain that to people because otherwise they will think you're biased, you're never going to say anything. But ask David Stern, God rest his soul, if I was biased in favor of the NBA when it came to labor negotiations and lockouts, you know, because I remember many calls where he called and cursed me out for the things I wrote about on his website, if you want to call it that way. So it depends on what you do, but it also you have to be discerning as a reader and a consumer about what you're looking at. And
You know,
what
the
you're,
MSG Network used to have a show when Jim Dolan first got the team. So they would invite all writers from all the different newspapers, different sports. And one by one, you didn't see them anymore. 'Cause at one point, if they said something negative about him or the Rangers or the Knicks, not really about the players themselves, because he doesn't really care if you criticize the players. If you mention his name, you were eventually gone. But, you know, I do the Nets games on Yes. Yes doesn't own, they don't have a piece of the Nets. It's the I have no idea how it works on the Yankee side. Obviously, they make a ton of money from the Yankees, but, you know, the last few years, it was Kevin Durant, who was unbelievable, but some drama off the court just in terms of Twitter, but Kyrie Irving was there. They never once said, I mean, Kyrie Irving's a godsend for TV and radio because there's always something going on. They never once said, oh, stay clear of that. They never once said, can't say this, please say this, never anything like that. And Kyrie always gave you something to talk about, always.
Great. Interesting, when Ted was here, he kind of referenced the Middle East situation, talking about enrollment here at the University of Maryland. But Ted is one of the first owners now to go out
NBA owners.
What's that? NBA owners,
owners,
right. To go out and allow and to court and take investment from a Middle Eastern country. We had the City Open here this year. They have a new title sponsor, which is a UAE company. And we've talked about this in terms of being sports washing. And I'm just wondering, what's your level of comfort or discomfort with this?
Well, look, it's not comfortable, to be sure, and certainly the Saudi investment in multiple sports teams around the world is troubling because you can take a benign position, but then you have to ask yourself, well, why are they doing it? You know, why is Mbappe offered $1 billion to play in Saudi Arabia? $1 billion to play soccer in Saudi Arabia. Okay, it's not because he's a great soccer player. It's not just because he's a great soccer player. And I think you're being really naive if you think otherwise. It's not about their ownership. It's not about them being the owner of Team A or Team B. It's them being able to say, Mbappe plays for our team. And people going, that's great. We're not going to ask you about your horrible human rights record then. We're going to ask you about soccer. I mean, that's the whole point of sports washing. So, I mean, it's troubling. I don't know that I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon because.
You mean the Middle East investment or just the idea?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. You've got every sports league, the valuations are going up. They're not going down. You know, the value of these teams are going through the roof. I mean, Josh Harris just bought the Commanders for $6 billion. And he had trouble getting the money, and he's a billionaire, like a real billionaire.
He only got like 30 other people.
And he had to get a whole bunch of people. I mean, these things are expensive, you know. And so, you know, you need just about everybody. And again, I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I tend to be kind of accepting the fact that we all have a certain amount of hypocrisy on this. And we have to accept that. As human beings, we're all kind of hypocritical on things because whether it's Saudi Arabia or China.
We didn't talk about China.
Everybody that's got one of these, you need to slow your roll about criticizing other companies or people for doing business with China because that's where your phone came from. Okay? So and you use this a lot, I think. Most of us use this a lot. So that's all I'm saying, is that we all have to accept it's an interconnected world, and there are people that do horrible things, and you can shun them and say we're not going to do business with them. I think most people at that level are going to continue to do business with them. That's just my opinion. Doesn't mean I'm
Of course, at one time, and some of you can remember Sun City in South Africa, and the movement that grew. Won't play Sun City. Arthur Ashe became involved. You remember John McEnroe didn't play. Golfers went over there and grabbed bags of millions of dollars that they couldn't get over here. We've seen that with the Live Golf Tournament. Ava, have you seen, or what have been your conversation with the team when this came up, or with Ted?
I'll be honest, I've talked about it way more I do a lot of tennis coverage for the Post, as also someone who works for the man who owns Amazon, I should say, acknowledging, conflict of interest here. But it's come up a lot more in my global sport coverage. And it kind of, when we got to Wimbledon this year, and there was all this hubbub of the WTA might have gone and played over in Saudi Arabia and held their big year event finals. And we kind of were asking all the players, and their answers were, we've kind of been waiting, it's inevitable. We feel like we've been waiting for this. It was a when, not an if. And it was really interesting speaking to those players who have, for years and years and years, like you said, played tournaments in places like China. You talk to players from the Middle East and say, I'm sorry, are we saying that Europe doesn't have, you can get in the weeds if you want to, but I think the thing that kind of opened my mind the most was speaking to some of those players from the Middle East. Ons Jabeur, who is a Wimbledon finalist, she's Tunisian, and she was saying, it's definitely sports washing. I've also seen in my country, though, the government provide programs and funding for girls and women in sports. She said, so that's kind of how I'm thinking of it is, yes, it's definitely sports washing in the US. In my country, I can see what it's changing. And Billie Jean King was kind of the one who signed on and said, I would be for that if these countries are willing to fund these programs, and if it brings about change, then yes, we're going to have to acknowledge some uncomfortable truths and acknowledge hypocrisy and everything like that. But that was kind of the first time where I saw that discussion take that turn towards, well, what is it accomplishing aside from sports washing, or maybe alongside sports washing? And that's where, again, I think it comes to being, if this is inevitable, that Middle East investment in sports is growing, and it will, you have to have people covering it, pointing out the hypocrisy, holding people accountable, asking hard questions. That's more important, going to be more important than ever, because this issue is not going away. It's only growing.
Yeah, the NBA plays preseason games in Abu Dhabi. USA Basketball played there, so all the Middle Eastern investment, it completely changed the biggest soccer league in the world. In England, it's going to change. Somebody's going to buy a team here, and I think it's probably be an NBA team eventually with all that money that guys have. And, he mentioned Mbappe. Think about Messi. A year ago, he can't win the big one, won the World Cup, and then he could have gone to Saudi Arabia for a ton of money, decided to come play in the United States. His popularity is off the charts. Their bank account, because Neymar also went there, and Ronaldo is playing in Saudi Arabia. I think if they had a basketball league over there, and guys were at the end of their career, and they're being offered $50 million, you don't think they're going to play basketball in Saudi Arabia? Come on. The guys would be over there playing.
Well, they're playing in China.
That's right. Yeah. James Harden had when he held up the sign, or when he said Daryl Morey's a liar, he was in China when he did that.
Yeah, a lot of guys have found a boatload of money at the end of their careers in China, and a lot of stardom. I just thinking of stardom. I think of Stephon Marbury.
Sure.
Couple of years.
He had a great third act
in China. Yeah. So, what's the future look like for the NBA? And you just heard Ted and Adam talk about it. How bright is the future? How worrisome is the future?
Oh, I think the future is incredibly bright for the NBA. I do think the NBA is a solid number 2 global league to soccer now. I don't think it's even close to the other. And football's making inroads. American football, I should say, is making some inroads in Europe, and they have games over there every year. But I don't think there's any question that the NBA is, or that basketball is the second most popular global sport in the world. I don't know. Maybe it's cricket. I could be wrong.
We got a cricket league coming.
No, it could be wrong. Cricket is incredibly popular. I'm not saying it's not. But I think basketball has reach everywhere. And I think globally, the number of players that come from around the world really kind of reinforces that idea that it's a global sport. I mean, you have, 200 guys, almost half of the league now is from outside the United States. And the quality of play is as good as it's ever been, I think. I don't like the kind of dependence on the three-point shot, but that's an aesthetic thing. That's not about skill level. The skill level is as good or better than as it's ever been. And I think that the league is growing in very strong ways, and they're trying to protect their flank by making the regular season more important. Because you're right. I mean, people forgot. People after opening night, it's like 6 weeks of nothing, until Christmas Day. And so they're trying to do it. So I think that they're going to. It's portending well on the business side. I'll put it that way.
Ava, who would you say are the most important personalities carrying the league forward?
Oh, definitely that kind of same upper tier band of stars that we were talking about. It's Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's LeBron James, of course. It is still Ja Morant. It's a bunch of, well, I was going to say young guys, but how old's LeBron? 38?
40.
40. He just turned 40? That's 39.
Okay.
39.
No way.
He looks like he's 40.
He looks fine. No, it's those guys, and those are kind of athletes, right, who have business ventures, as DA mentioned, overseas. They have a really strong brand. They have a really strong following. And they're really, really fun to watch. I don't think anyone could sit up here, anyone who covers or watches says the NBA doesn't have an incredibly bright future. And, I mean, you see it also. The WNBA, which is part owned by the NBA, is expanding. That's good. That's a growth metric that we talk about. It's not NBA expansion, although I don't think that's too far off.
Yeah, and we need to talk about the WNBA too in just a second. But Frank, what are the personalities?
I think the next big thing is going to be, LeBron owning a team in Las Vegas.
Sure.
And then they'll do what they should do, which is have a team in Seattle. Now, whether that's going to be 30 more players in the league, so that's great for jobs. Are there 30 more good quality players that could fill out these teams? That remains to be seen. I think player development is a big part of it. I think if you look around the world with these young kids, they play in academies, even in basketball they do. Over here we do it differently. So I think that's why sometimes some of these European players, maybe they come into the league a little higher skilled. I also wonder too, though, Joel Embiid and Jokic and Doncic and Giannis being international players, can they carry the league if they're not American born? In England, you have Mo Salah plays for Liverpool. He's huge. Son, who's South Korean, is a hugely popular player. I don't know yet in this country whether or not an international player could do that.
But I just asked you about it. What personality can carry the league?
Wembanyama. We haven't said his name yet. That's our bad.
For?
Ding, ding,
Wemby.
ding. Yeah, I've never had non-basketball fans in my life send me so many highlights of Victor Wembanyama. Like people who are soccer fans and everything. Yeah,
And he may not even be Rookie of the Year.
Exactly. Possible.
It's possible.
Yeah.
So, who has met him? Who's dealt with him so far?
I've talked to him a couple times.
And what do you think? In French or in English?
I don't speak. Like Steve Martin, I can say omelette du fromage. That's my French. No, I mean, in English, of course, and his English is perfect. It's impeccable. I mean, the thing I like about him and his whole group is that they have built this whole thing up for him to do exactly what he's doing. He's not afraid of all the attention and all the heat and all the light that comes from being the number one player and the biggest prospect since LeBron. They're like, yeah, bring it on. That's what we want to be. And he's prepared for it. He's ready for it. He's handled it beautifully. It's great. I think it's good for him that he's in San Antonio because the Spurs are as good as anybody about protecting, shielding, keeping people away from their guys and making it.
Well, it is San Antonio.
Well, no, that's just their mentality.
That's why he might not become a big star, though.
Maybe, but I think he will. I think it'll be a good test, but I think his game is so good. They'll win. And even though they weren't as popular as other teams that won a lot of championships, they were still popular. And he will be the most popular Spur of all time, I think, more so even than Ice.
Okay. Who I think has a new book out.
It's just come out, yep.
There you go. Good plug. I mentioned the WNBA, which I thought ended the season interestingly on a sour note. I don't know if any of you were there to cover the championship series, But where is the WNBA right now? And how would you characterize the end of their season when some of the biggest stars in the game would not engage those of us in the media who may have wanted to ask them questions?
Well, I'll just start. I did not cover the finals. There are people way more qualified than me to cover the WNBA, and that covered it very well all season, including at The Athletic. I would highly recommend you read them.
Another plug.
Yeah. But it was troubling to me as a journalist that a team in the championship series of its league would not speak after the final game of the season. I mean, that's incredibly troubling to me. But that is kind of an extension of a real reversal in their media policy, which was going on all season, which really kind of limited access to their players. Now, I'm not going to say I've spent a ton of time covering the Mystics, but I certainly have been in the Mystics locker room before. And it was beyond professional. I mean, everything was handled completely above board. I didn't see a single thing that I would even think was kind of weird, like. And Ava, you've covered some of their games as well. I just never saw anything that I would go, whoa, ooh, that's bad. They got to do something about that.
Yeah, I spent 3 seasons covering the Mystics up through their championship run. And for those of you guys who don't know, they elected to close locker rooms this season and bring players outside. So PR people would bring players outside of locker rooms, which is not what, in an NBA locker room, I go in after every game and talk to pretty much whoever I want to talk to. So there was a lot of argument about, well, it's a lot of male reporters covering the league, players aren't necessarily comfortable with that. That's a terrible argument for me. If we're going back to that, I'm out of a job. No, it was extremely disappointing, and it's kind of, the WNBA has found a really smart, really good niche where for a long time it was, are you a sports league or are you an advocacy group? And they've kind of found a really good middle ground where they say, no, our fans care about our issues, care about our players, so we can be a little bit of both. Unfortunately, it's kind of carried over into their media policies where, no, if you want to be a sports league and they do want coverage, and I know this because PR people say it and their players will tell it to you, then you kind of have to play by the rules. So it was definitely disappointing to see that. But I also understand, having been in a bunch of WNBA locker rooms, it's not a lot of, and I don't mean this as a slight at all, but it's not a lot of classically trained journalists. Because the league is kind of opening its arms and saying, yes, we want coverage, we want people to put our stuff online, we want bloggers in, it's not everybody who understands the rules. So it's really an infrastructure thing where you need to have more funding in the WNBA, because what's happening is you have a lot of turnover among their PR staffs. Can you tell I could talk about this for like 6 hours? But it's like people who are training the media, who are working with journalists. It's the way journalists are trained. It's newspapers and other outlets putting their best journalists on the WNBA and not saying, no, you're an intern, you go cover this. It's kind of a top to bottom issue, and it's going to take a long time to solve, I think.
And one of the issues, especially now that they have, is the women's college basketball has become so good. The players are popular. They seem to embrace kind of the drama of it. I think the WNBA should probably do that as well. But I think, the closing of the locker room, you could get around it. It's not ideal, but I think they're making a mistake with that. Players, it was Sabrina Ionescu who didn't speak after the finals. Jonquel Jones didn't speak, and Vandersloot, who took the final shot, didn't speak. So you're not, like, if you're trying to grow the league, I think that's the disconnect sometimes with the players. Like Bill Russell, when he's growing the league, he's traveling by bus and by train. And I think the WNBA players, I understand it. Like, I want to fly private too, and I want to fly in a charter. But every time you hear them, they're talking about, we want to fly charter. Well, nobody cares. You don't care how the fans get to the game, so why should the fans care how you get to the game? You just, I get it. Ideally, you'd want to do that, but the league right now can't afford it. When the MLS was coming up, it was growing the league. Thierry Henry was flying commercial flights with the Red Bulls. He was one of the most popular players in the world. It's just the way the league was. Now, they've eventually flown charter. It's going to eventually happen in the WNBA, but I think every time a microphone is in front of one of them and they're constantly talking about the travel, I think you're going to turn off. You're not going to recruit fans by doing that. It's just not going to work.
Well, let me ask you this. Are we in the media doing the WNBA a favor more by being less critical of them, or would we do them a favor by being as critical of them as we would be if Giannis didn't come out and speak after a championship game?
Yeah, we talk a lot about women's sports on radio. My daughter who's here, she coaches in college. Brian's daughter he coaches her AAU team, and we always tend to take a critical look. We talk about it like we would about men's sport. I think we're beyond, isn't it great that all the women are out there playing? I mean, it should be more than that. And I think you kind of saw that with the U.S. women's national team, the soccer team, where they were finally getting some blowback, and it was good. People were talking about, well, why did she
Carly
play?
Lloyd.
Yeah, why was she in the lineup? They shouldn't have subbed her off. Isn't that what you want? And all of a sudden, people were like, "Oh, why are you criticizing the team?" No, this is what happened.
Sports.
It's part of the culture.
Sports.
That means you made it when that's happening, and I think that's a good thing. And I get it. I think sometimes people might be a little reluctant to do that because you don't want to criticize them because you don't want the blowback. But I actually think it's good for sports.
You mentioned college. I thought Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, that was great. What are you talking about? That was awesome. Talking junk to each other, that was fantastic. Do more of that. You both are that good. Yes,
Yeah, it was an interesting.
absolutely.
It was like an old school lens was put on that moment, and I think back to to the first women's World Cup that was here, and how that ended, and what our reaction was to that moment. And we would not have had the same reaction. We don't have the same reaction to men.
Yeah, well, we didn't have the same reaction this year when the U.S. team kind of flamed out.
Right.
It was like, God, that sucked. How did that happen? It wasn't about anything other than their performance on the field, which is what we all want, right?
Right, exactly. And while I've got you all here, let's clean up one little thing real quick.
Okay.
And we'll move on to something else.
We got to take questions.
Are we ready to take questions yet? Caitlin will let me know
okay.
when we're ready.
It's like no one has looked at a watch.
Who's the greatest basketball player ever, and who's the most important basketball player ever, and is that the same person?
You want me to I don't care. I always couch whenever I'm asked this, which is every other day of my life, I always couch this by saying I cannot comment on players I did not see.
Okay. Got video.
No, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not, you could tell me how great, Babe Ruth was. I never saw him play. I don't know. I just watched that old video of him running around, like that. I don't know. You hit a lot of home runs. Why were you on for me? But I do ask people who did see those players play, who are still alive, how great they were, and I listen to their opinions. So the greatest player I ever saw in my 35 years of covering the NBA was Michael Jordan, and it's not particularly close.
Okay.
No, it's not particularly close.
And LeBron says to you when you say that to him?
I don't know. I mean, I would say that if he was there, I would say, I love you, but Michael's the best I ever saw. Period. End of sentence. I'm not stuttering. He's the best I ever saw for a lot of different reasons. Now, was the most important player? It depends on importance. Doing a lot of work in that sentence.
Right.
You could say Oscar Robertson was the most important player. You could say Spencer Haywood was the most important player in the history of the league. I would say Bill Russell, just because I think his excellence with the Celtics helped keep the league alive when there was some doubt whether the league was going to survive. And I think the Celtics being as great as they were, and his battles with Chamberlain in the 60s really kind of kept interest up in the league to the point where it could somehow get to the 70s and 80s, and then Magic, Bird, Michael, and the usuals that we talk about.
Ava, you can stay to this
Favorite
century.
question. Can I answer Rafa?
Sure, go ahead.
Instead, I'd rather do that. No, this is my least favorite question in all of sports. I don't know what I'm sorry, I don't know what it accomplishes. It just, I guess it's a gateway to talk about
It gives Frank something to talk about on radio every morning.
Right,
3 hours
true.
a day.
3 hours to fill, that's true. No, I like the Bill Russell answer. That's always kind of my answer, but I'm not qualified. That is the one time where I'll say, I've never
We as
played
sports
this
writers
game.
never say we're not qualified.
No, it's important to say when you're not qualified to do that.
Important to say I don't know.
And and
we
ask
hate
somebody else the
transparency.
question. But I really, sorry.
Punt.
Yeah, punt.
I wasn't there for World War II. I know what happened, though, and I know who won. I know the good guys. The good guys were victorious. I agree with David on both counts. I think Bill Russell, most important. Michael Jordan, it was an honor to cover him. I never thought, I covered those, when the Knicks would get eliminated, then you would join the Chicago Bulls.
Which you did all the time.
Yeah,
Well, I covered the Bullets, so I was on the Bulls from minute one.
And it was an absolute, I never thought Michael Jordan was going to lose. Never did. And he was great because if he had a bad game, you wrote about it knowing the very next game he was going to have a great game. And the one guy that I think always gets forgotten is Will Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Because he averaged 50 points
so
and
good.
25 rebounds.
Yeah, he was so good.
It was so ridiculous.
His stats are cartoonish. They're not even real.
And everyone else could have done that back then.
Right, exactly.
He was the only one doing it.
Yeah.
So I think Will Chamberlain kind of gets shortchanged.
And he averaged 50 and 25 and couldn't win the MVP over Bill Russell.
Yeah.
Why does that happen?
Stupid sports writers.
Exactly. Morons.
Back to some other topics I think we had we wanted to talk about with the NBA, and I think that has to do with all of these new things that they have tried in the last several years. The newest one being the tournament, working out this load management deal with the Players Association, the rest of the league. Which ones over the last few years maybe jump out to you as being ones that have worked and maybe some that haven't?
The play-in tournament.
The play-in
tournament is the
yes.
answer.
Yes,
It's
to my chagrin,
really
it's
yeah.
worked.
Yes, it's an extra couple of games to cover, but that's become a real thing that players care about at the end of the year that kind of gives players a push in March and April when everyone is tired and dragging their feet.
A lot
It
less
makes
tanking
things-
because of it.
Yeah, and
Yes.
it's quick. It happens really quickly. That's my answer.
Yeah, I don't like it. I think Milwaukee finished with the best record, and then Miami was 7th all year, and then ended up 8th. So Milwaukee, finishing with the best record, had to play the better team. I think if you finish with the best
Hotter team.
record, you should get to pick who you want to play. They would have picked Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And then they would have advanced. So to me, you should reward the best record in the regular season. That's why one of the things about the in-season tournament is giving out a trophy. I think it's pretty cool. Now, people are going to mock it or whatever, but make it a tradition. The team that finishes with the best record in the regular season, they do it for the NHL, give them a trophy. It's an accomplishment to finish with the best record. And to me, Milwaukee didn't – I like Giannis. Milwaukee didn't get – I felt like what was the advantage of finishing with the best record? They got to play the better team, Miami, then play Brooklyn, or who was 8th place? Atlanta.
Well, the one thing that's happening with the in-season tournament is that it's becoming – now the basketball players are becoming a lot like the baseball playoffs, because the baseball players almost never reward the team with the best record. It's almost never the team with the best record that wins the World Series. It's the hottest team, the team that's had to fight to get in. And now you're seeing the same thing with the play-in tournament. Miami had to fight to get in. They were down to Chicago in the first round with 8 minutes to go. Their season's over if they lose that game. And so they had to fight and scrap. And so they had an edge to them that maybe the team with the best record didn't have. So you can't have it both ways. You can have the kind of March Madness way of determining a champion in the NBA by having the play-in tournament, but some people like the certainty of knowing you're going to find out who the best team is in the NBA.
But I would do something like if you finish 10 games better than the team that you've played, they only get 2 home games then.
Something that way.
It has to be. There has to be more incentive to having a better record in the regular season.
So everybody in the league basically has to be bribed. So owners have to be bribed to have more home dates. Players have to be bribed to play more games, more minutes.
Well,
but you can figure out a way.
We're
to have
not
both.
we're not a volunteer media company, Kevin. Like everybody here is here because you get paid by somebody to do something, right? So I mean it's capitalism, man. I mean it's what we kind of signed off on. So.
Okay, all right. And
nodding at you.
Oh, you're ready. The great Caitlin Wilson, ladies and gentlemen, Assistant Director of the Povich Center. Who'd like to go first?
I'm Josh Banner, graduate here at Merrill, class of 24.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. You're responsible for that, so I hope, you know.
That's a shot.
So I think there's
your grades are excellent, sir.
I think with the NBA, there's a big imbalance of coverage, which is a big issue in terms of, I mean, we've talked about like the WNBA, but also like, you know, just within the NBA itself, you think about big, quote unquote, big market teams, small market teams. I think it's a big problem when someone like a courtside reporter for the ESPN says like, oh, this is my first time watching Nikola Jokic here in the Western Conference Finals, even though he's won like 2 MVPs, played for 8 years. Or, you know, when the Lakers even before they had LeBron, when they were like the middest of mid teams, they were getting more coverage than most of the good teams. And I'm just curious, what responsibility does ESPN or the people who work for ESPN have on reporting on each team as fairly as they can, regardless of whether or not they're quote unquote big market or quote unquote small market?
Well, go ahead.
I mean, I can't. You should never say. I mean, this is the first time I've seen Jokic play the game. If you get League Pass, the games are on. And I think this whole small market, big market thing. The Milwaukee Bucks have changed because Giannis is on the team. And to Ava's point before, it is a star-driven league. And Nikola Jokic, if you like basketball, I mean, the guy is so unique. That's a guy that you pay to go see play. I understand what you're saying. It's still, LeBron and the Lakers and the Boston Celtics, those are still the 2 biggest teams. So you go, I covered the Knicks. We go to Atlanta, Knicks fans are there. You go to Miami, Knicks fans are there. Everywhere in the country. You go, Chicago Bulls have a following, Lakers, Celtics are about 6 or 7 teams that have a big-time following all around the league. But the Denver Nuggets, now that they have a true megastar in Nikola Jokic, it's different. Their games are going to be on, and they're exciting to watch because that's like a different level player.
Yeah, I think there's, there's 2 things there's 2 ways to answer your question. I mean, the league wants to promote its stars wherever they are. They want people to watch Giannis in Milwaukee. They want people to watch Ja in Memphis. They want people to watch Wemby in San Antonio. And guess what? San Antonio's going to be on a bunch this year. They were on once last year. They're going to be on 20 times this year. Why? Because of Wemby. That's why. That's what drives this league. That's what's always driven this league. Back to the days of Russell and Chamberlain. That's what people watch. They watch the great individual players on these teams. That's not changing. So if you don't have a great individual star, superstar player, you're not going to be on national TV a lot. That's just reality. That's the bottom line. Sunday night football in America, they don't put the Houston Texans on a lot. It's not because they hate the Houston Texans. It's because they don't, until this year with Stroud, they didn't have a superstar the last few years. So the NBA, whether it's the ESPN or Turner, in terms of the national games, they're going to put on the players. Steph's going to be on. He's just going to be on.
It's the 10 teams that play on Christmas.
Yeah, the 10 teams that play on Christmas are going to play 80% of the games on ESPN and on TNT this year.
Hi, my name is Jack Perry. I'm a senior, fellow Blackistone student, fellow beat reporter, and fellow New Jerseyan. So I have a question here for Ava specifically. So Ted just came on here and recently said that he started to see some signs of life from your publication. You are the person that covered the team.
It is me. I am the sign of life.
So I just want to ask in general, like in terms of an owner having dialogue on the publication, probably the biggest publication that covers them locally. Like, what was your reaction to that? Him saying that in the moment, like.
He's gone.
White hot rage?
No.
Yes. No. I think Ted is right in that we are turning away, and I think all of the journalism students in this room hopefully are being taught. I know they're being taught that being first is not the right way to go. You want to check your sources, da-da-da. That's what he's talking about. And I know he was kind of trying to say that there's more context and we're getting kind of fuller pictures rather than instant reaction game stories and things like that. My predecessor, who's here in the audience, wrote every single day when she covered the Wizards. I write sometimes twice a week, which is insane for a daily newspaper beat writer. But I think that's what he was saying if I would have to guess. But otherwise, that's always going to make me defensive. I write for a newspaper. We're not exactly a thriving breed, but we're a very proud bunch of journalists. So it's definitely about having an open dialogue with all of the people who own the teams you cover, who run the teams you cover. That's an important back and forth to have.
We want them mad at us every once in a while. It's good for business.
If they're not mad at you, you're not doing something right.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Martin. I'm a freshman here at the Merrill College. I want to ask about Carissa Thompson made comments this week about maybe cutting corners in terms of deadlines. DA, regardless of the extent of which it was, speaking to a lot of young journalists here, you want to just touch on maybe some of the dangers of those kind of practices in the context of maintaining player and team personnel relationships?
Well, if you wait 2 hours, something will be posting on The Athletic that I wrote today about that. I was a sideline reporter for 12 years, 13 years, mostly for Turner. I did ESPN for a couple of years, but it was mostly Turner. And now look, I get it. I understand. 90% of the people who watch games think sideline reporting is stupid and useless and pointless. And I never learned anything from a sideline reporter. I've heard all of these, I get it. It's okay if you believe that, honestly. But just know that they're not appendages. They're reporters, all of them. And the people that do it the best, the people that I respect, the people that I emulated, like Pam Oliver and Andrea Kramer and people like that, who were the best I've ever seen do this, were not just appendages. And I damn sure know they didn't make nothing up, because that's an affront to everybody who does this for a living. And to say it blithely on a podcast, I just do not understand. I don't understand why she's still employed. I'm sorry. I just don't think I think you have to have certain amount of. I mean, all we've got is people believing us when we say things and when we write things. If they don't believe you, what do you have? You don't have anything, And so, there were lots of times where coaches blew me off, coming back onto the court in the second half. Or they said something that was stupid, or said something that didn't make any sense, or said something that I couldn't use. Well, guess what? Go grab an assistant coach then. Go grab the trainer, go grab a player, grab somebody, and ask them a damn question that you can use. Okay? This isn't rocket science, okay? We ask questions, people give us answers. We tell you what they told us. That's what we do. And so it was beyond disappointing. I hope young reporters do not believe that's how the job is done, because that is not how the job is done. If you ever do this for a living and you become a sideline reporter, you will find that 90 to 95% of what you get never makes the air, because there's just not enough time. And that's okay. That's the decision you make. You're going to do this for a living. You over-report, and very little gets on the air. It's okay. It's fine. That's the job. But understand, they work their asses off. All of them that are the best, that do it every week. The Tracy Wolfsons of the world. When I was growing up, James Brown was one of the best I ever saw do it. They work at this. This is not a joke. It's not frivolous. It's their job. It was my job. And I understand how hard that job is.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jonah Kaufman, and I'm a senior, and I have a question about sports betting. We're seeing media companies like ESPN starting to open their own sports books, as well as the other way around, where traditional sports books like FanDuel are getting into media and journalism by hiring people like Shams. My question is there an ethical dilemma in intersecting these two entities under one company, and what can be done to keep them accountable?
It's tough, but you like it. I'm sorry. I don't want to dominate this. Y'all jump in. I wish there wasn't such a prevalence of gambling in sports, but there is, because consumers want that. And so as a media company, you have to respond to what your consumers want, and you try to put up barriers and walls and church and state. But people your age bet on sports a lot, and so you can put your head in the sand and say this is terrible, or you can try to do it in a responsible way. And I think Our company is involved in that, and ESPN as well, and just about every media company on earth has some betting apparatus in place right now. It's reality.
Used to go into a baseball clubhouse before cell phones, and it would have a sign up that if a player wanted to call out of the clubhouse, he had to call through an operator. This way they could, keep track of all the calls. Now everybody has a cell phone. They could do whatever they want. But you think about the NFL, which you used to think the betting part was done. They're in bed with it. Look at the NBA. We're not that far removed from Tim Donaghy. There's just so much money in it now. There's no stopping it, and it's going to dominate a lot of these media companies as well.
Thank you. I'm Gibson Hurt. I'm a freshman here at the College of Journalism, and I guess similar to what Ryan asked before about silent reporting, can you just talk a little bit about how important building relationships with either players or coaches is to get the information you want? Because I know sometimes when I've talked to people who I haven't interviewed before, they'll just give me general, bland, nothing answers. What do you do to work to get really the detailed, specific answers that you want to go on air or write about?
Ava, the one thing is you just have to be around all the time. I was on the Nick beat for 2 years. Patrick, one day we're in the locker room in Dallas, and Patrick Ewing said, Frank. And he kept saying it. Well, he's not talking to me. I know he doesn't know who I am. And I turned around and he said, isn't your name Frank? And we started talking about it. It takes it's hard when you're just, parachuting in and talking to a guy. It's hard to build a relationship. They have to trust you. If the players trust you, management people trust you, the coaches, when you're not going to write everything that they tell you, that's the only way it just takes a long time. That's what being on a beat is all. Ava, you would know when you're on a beat, it takes a while. You're not going to be, if you try to pretend like you're going to be best friends with somebody right away, the players, they could see that coming from a mile away. You got to kind of ease your way into it.
Yeah, it's just time, and view those kind of bland, generic answers that you get the first time as a starting point. Now they know your face. Now they know you're going to come back and ask a question the next time. It's time, and I think the other thing that's most important is don't always need something from the people you're talking to, from coaches, front office people, from players. Go up and talk to them like human beings. How was your day? Tough game. Make a joke. I think that's the best way to kind of build a relationship, and also make it not so transactional. You're not always the journalist just going up and saying, I need a quote, I need something, I want to ask you about this. But when you're around a team, if you are a beat writer, it's going to happen naturally. You're there every single day. You see these people more than they see their family. So it's a natural thing, but you just have to be kind of patient and don't push for, I would say, the big quote, the big get, the big scoop. That kind of stuff is going to happen as you build trust, and it's just a waiting game.
Thank you.
Hey, so sorry. My name's Alexa Henry. I'm a grad student. I should be graduating in the spring of 25. I actually will be in Professor Blackistone's class next semester. My question is more specific to you, Ava. So you've mentioned that you were in the NBA locker rooms, WNBA locker rooms. So how, as a woman of color, did you navigate being in those spaces when it is majority white or male, or just, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, the only group that were mostly white and mostly male were the other reporters. So me and the players were just fine. That's definitely something that worked to my advantage. But I think even guys, and not necessarily even guys of color who are around my age, you're talking to people, you find ways in. But I can honestly say I've never had, especially as players get younger and younger, and I get older and older, but we're of the same generation-ish. I've never had a problem with a player not kind of understanding where I'm coming from or not respecting me as a professional working journalist. I think the biggest issues I've ever had were, again, people who are kind of older, and maybe the men who owned the teams or who were running the teams, and even that is kind of a breed that's on its way out, and people are realizing that you can't talk to people like that anymore, you can't treat people like that anymore. But I've never had an issue in locker rooms in any of the sports I've covered. I've covered, sports that are not very diverse. I covered NBA, NFL, but it's honestly extremely heartening. It's the best part, especially I think about an NFL locker room where I just say that because there are so many more people in there, so many more players in there than an NBA locker room. But you get people from every single corner of the country, from every different socioeconomic background. That is, I can genuinely say, is my favorite part. And in the NBA, learning about all the international players. So that's something that I've never had trouble with. It is the absolute joy of my job is talking to the players, and it's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that it? Thank you.
Well, that was fabulous. So I want to thank panel 2, David and Ava and Frank, and our moderator extraordinaire, Kevin. The conversations that you heard tonight are the kinds of conversations that happen daily at the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. And I invite you to come to our website, povichcenter.org, to read some of the reporting that our students have been doing, also to see a video soon of the program you saw tonight. And I also invite you to a reception outside that door. We hope you'll stick around for a little while and chat with us and maybe have an opportunity to talk one-on-one with some of the panelists. So thank you so much for coming.
And I just want to say one thing. It really has nothing to do with this particular gathering, but you've probably heard the saying about it takes a village to raise a child. I grew up in a village as a child, and I am so pleased and honored and tickled to death to be able to tell you that one of those villagers who reared me, my 6th grade teacher, is here tonight, Mr. Conway. So the village is real. If you got one, hold it close to you. Thank you.